A very warm welcome to you all. Welcome to Designing Cities for All.
The 2-year activity program of Pakhuis de Zwijger,
in which we take a deep dive into designing products,
places and systems for all.
At every level, we can see certain communities being marginalized, being taken advantage of, and it's all part of the design.
When you're neurodiverse, you're in a world that isn't designed for you.
We're not the only species on the planet. The city needs to be also a city for the other species.
And we need to do something because the old structures in which we worked don't work.
Things won't change just if we just let things happen.
Instead of saying, what can we do to mitigate the impacts? We need to start asking ourselves, what is causing that?
Design is political, that we need to design processes, that we are all different, but there are things that unite us.
These are the things that need to be on the table, that need to be recovered in order to redesign the society.
Everything around us was once designed and can therefore be redesigned.
How do we teach design in a way where students can be really critical of the systems of power that have informed and dominated design?
Inclusion happens by design or not at all.
I think it's always some kind of a co-creation process, and you have to make very little steps and then figure out together what works and what doesn't.
it takes as much time to do something good as it takes time to do something bad.
All design tells a story.
But there's also a bit of a need to not just write ourselves into the past, but also kind of write ourselves into the future.
I invite you so much to join my path of liberation, and I'm hopefully being welcomed by your path of liberation.
We have to heal collectively. We have to help each other understand some of these constructs that actually divide us.
Not fitting in was a blessing, or I would have turned out just like you.
Yeah, I love that last sentence. You just watched a recap of the first 2 years of Designing Cities for All, a research and activity program that indeed takes a deep dive into designing products and places and systems for all. And today we're going to take that all part to the next level. But first, I want to really welcome you all. So nice that you're all here in this room. How are you feeling? Awake? Yes? Kind of? Cold? Are you cold? Warm. Warm? Warm? Okay. Have you eaten? Everybody? Okay. Nice. So we're happy and comfortable? Okay. Great. So in this next phase of Designing Cities for All that you're now part of and that we're in, 2023 and 2024, we've been exploring the concept of regenerative design. As you saw, there were already a lot of designers and storytellers and artists and scientists and other experts around the table. And we have a couple of really wonderful ones with us today as well that I'm going to introduce to you in a second. And this phase is really about how can we redesign our society in a way that has systems in which everybody can bloom, so people, but also beyond humans. So how can we all flourish? And my name is Lindsay Beda, and we just had a nice getting to know each other dinner. There's so much we can say about who you are, but tonight I'm just happy to moderate the conversations about topics that are quite like mind-boggling at times, but really intriguing to me personally as well. So I'm happy to dive in a second. I want to, do you know where you are, the name of this program? Yeah, what is it? Great, Jasmijn's mom knows where she is. Well done. Indeed, seeing the unseen, and together with Jasmijn and with Yechiam and with Roos and with Leon, we'll explore what that means. And it's all about relationships, as we'll find out. So how can we listen to the voices of unseen beings, or maybe beings that we don't happen to see? How can we represent them? Also, more fundamentally, how can we move away from that othering that we do, this kind of fake dualism between the human and the non-human? How can we also draw from practices in design, in forging a path forward, knowing what we know at this point? And we welcome questions, of course, also from people that are watching from home. Welcome to you as well. If you're sitting warmly on your couch and you have a question, you can go to menti.com and you can use the code 11723687. And I'll get your question here on my iPad, so we'll include yours as well. Okay, ready to rumble? We do wonder, why are you here? Actually, we were just like wondering out loud, why did you come? Someone asked you, and you said, okay, sure. Okay, anyone else? Why did you come? What intrigued you?
What movie?
What movie, yeah.
I thought it was like the English translation of Onder het Maaiveld.
Oh.
This is different.
It's a bit different. You're going to look at us. Yeah, and you're going to participate. Is that okay? Just try it out. See if you like it. No, this is not a movie theater. But it will also be about soil. Yeah, it will be about soil for sure. It's going to be way better than a movie. Yes. Okay, great. It's a good movie. Okay. Some ambiguous reasons to be here, but okay. Okay, well, let's find out why we're here. And we're going to start by not just talking about it, but really feeling it for a second. And I would love to introduce you to Rosalie Bak, who will lead an experiment for us. And Rose is an artist, designer, in many different ways and modalities, researching how we relate to other beings. She's also a student of haptotherapy. And I'm going to give the floor to you, Rose.
Thank you. And yeah, good to see you. It's quite a full house. I'm Rose. And in the next 10-15 minutes, we're going to do an exercise together. And that exercise is built on top of haptotherapeutic work. Who knows haptotherapy? 1 hand, 2 hands, 3 hands. Yeah. So I study at the Academie voor Haptonomie in Doorn. And haptonomy or haptotherapy is a therapeutic practice that includes touch and somatic exercises and play in order to help people come back to their body. Because our bodies are amazing sensing machines, right? We have the capacity to feel our heartbeat, to notice that we are a bit full from our dinner, but we also can notice maybe something of our neighbor, right? The energy in the room. And we can discover like what it is like to relate to another human being. That's what you do in haptotherapy. But I'm curious, can we extend this also to relating to other life forms? And can these practices also be translated? For instance, when we are working with soil. So I did something a bit weird. I brought soil to the indoors. I know we should have been outside doing these kinds of practices, right? But we have to work with what is here. You have a package in your lab. And for those who are at home, I would invite you to, well, maybe not empty your plant pot. Just pick a very ordinary object, maybe a marker or your cat, or can be your loved one, or a chair.
Or a little plant, just like how...
Or a plant. Yeah, it can also be a plant. Yeah. And if you're here, you can open up the package. And I will try to do the same, so I'm going to stumble a bit with my mic. And you can place it in your lap, maybe with the little knots to your knees, so that you have a little bit of a bucket. And I'm going to start with a little bit of a guided meditation so that you can land in this location, right? Because you just came from work or from home or from cycling or from snow. And then we're going to do an exercise that's called waking up the hands. And I'm borrowing this exercise. This is not something that I came up with. But it's an exercise that is meant to open up your sense of touch in your hands. And obviously we will be touching the soil. Yeah? So you can unfocus your eyes from the stage. Maybe you look far away a bit or in front of you as a start. Softening your eyes. Closing your eyes. Maybe taking a deep breath. And a sigh. And again a breath. And a sigh. Maybe you feel your back against your chair. You feel the weight of your body. You feel your feet on the floor. Maybe you move your feet a little bit to get familiar with the texture of the ground. You allow your ears to listen to the sounds that are close by, or the silence far away. And now that you're here, slowly, with your fingers and your hands, you can playfully start to explore the soil, organic matter that you have in front of you, or the object that you have in your hands. Gently, using the tip of your finger to explore. The texture, the size of the particles, the temperature. Is it hotter or colder than your body? Does it contain any moisture? Does it contain of one element, or is it a multitude? What happens if you squeeze it? How thick? How heavy? How compact is it? Or can you make it? And what do you notice in your body now that you're touching this wet, humid soil? What are the thoughts? What do you notice in your body? Maybe you have some associations. And did you allow yourself to play? What happens if it gets stuck underneath your nails? Or maybe in between your fingers? What's the sensation like? And if you stroke it on top of your hand? Is that a different sensation? And what happens if you slow this down to half its speed? And again, slowing down to half its speed. And in a little while, you can say goodbye to your touching or continue, but at least you can come back to the space. Slowly opening up your eyes. Maybe start by looking again to the floor, maybe to your hands. And we are here. Welcome back. This was an exercise, but also a bit of an experiment. So I'm super curious if there are maybe one or two people from the audience, if there's time, who can maybe briefly share what they noticed during this sensing exercise. I believe there's someone with a mic, or if you have a loud voice. Who dares?
The mic is great because then people at home can also...
Yeah, sorry, people at home. Yeah. Is there anyone? Yeah.
Thank you for the exercise. Grounding. I was very stressed and came from another event. Normally I can't really get myself into the mood of something very quickly. And touching the ground, growing up in the countryside, really closing my eyes put me into a completely different perspective and space. And I feel centered now afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And also thank you for sharing that it came, or it brought something up. Yeah. Someone who had a totally different or similar experience?
Can you hear me? Yes,
I can.
Okay. I really like to touch the clay. I like claying as well. But I thought because you started like touch it gently and stuff like that, I felt like I was not allowed to play. And then at some point you said, and now play with it. And I was like, oh, so
now
I'm supposed to do this. That's great. So I was really happy actually. But then I opened my eyes and I saw a worm. And I clayed it with, so I don't know if it's still alive. So I'm a bit...
Okay, some accidental deaths.
I have multiple emotions going on.
Collateral damage.
I understand. Do we need to take a moment, maybe?
No, it's fine.
Well, maybe you unpack it a bit. Yeah, it was fresh soil. I dug it up today. I also hope to return it after the exercise. So please do not put it in your bag, although it is tempting to bring the worm home.
No, it can go back to its own house.
Okay. Yeah, okay. But thank you for sharing. And sorry, worm. Yeah.
Mixed emotions. Yes. Yeah.
For me too now.
I think this is great. I think we should do this every time.
We can?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really, I hope that we can remember this throughout the conversation. What we just experienced. I would also like to reflect with the other guests and reflect and introduce you all, so that we're one whole group. Leon, maybe we can start with you. Leon Lapa Pereira. That's because you're Portuguese and German. You're a performance researcher, and you kind of make bridges between humans and non-humans, as we understand it. For instance, for the Embassy of the North Sea. But maybe you can explain it better, of course, if I missed something. But I'm also curious, just how did this feel for you? You're still with the soil? How does it feel?
Yeah, I'm still feeling. I love the association with a worm, or the story with a worm, and the empathy that came up immediately. And I mean, not only for you, but everyone else as well. And yeah, this gives a completely different meaning to this piece of soil, since we suddenly have something in our hands that is alive. And I mean, we all had something in our hands that was alive, and the earth is still alive. But it was interesting that it was embodied through the worm, and we could all sense that there was a sense of grief and a sense of empathy suddenly. So yeah, that's a little bit in a microscopic scale what I'm looking for, and in a way what the Embassy of the North Sea is also looking for, of storytelling and telling stories that affect us and that bring us to the moment where we can have empathy and affection and relate to things that we are anyways surrounded and connected to in any moment.
Yeah, but that we forgot that we're connected to sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you, Leon. Yechiam. Yechiam Gurel. It's good, yeah. Among many other lives of yours that I read about, you started a circular bakery, the Baking Lab here in Amsterdam, that also kind of became a hub or a community for fermentation experiments and a learning space. Are there any links between what we did just now and your work?
Yeah, I think there is a direct link, beside the fact that Rosalie was there when we just started Baking Lab 6 years ago. But we are, I mean, I think all of us in one way or another in this group, and probably also in the audience, are trying to make sense out of our senses. And at Baking Lab we are not necessarily using the soil immediately to be more aware of the environment that we live in and the food that we are eating, but we're starting normally with fermenting dough and doing some other fermentation, but it's the same mindfulness kind of attitude that we try to promote, using reviving our senses and not just following recipes and letting our staff explore the story behind the things that we
so in see. Making the bread you use
in the process we really try to be open for this kind of explorations, but at the same time we also try to, I mean, this is a kind of language that you are actually promoting here. It's a different kind of way of interacting with the world around you. So we very much relate to that, but we also try to bring the language of science into it. So we try to really bridge and that's a nice step.
Yeah,
to bring,
definitely.
You
I was about to say, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I can take over if you.
Sure. Yeah.
No, so but I think that's it's difficult to really coin down what we are doing, but we are in this environment where senses and a kind of awareness is becoming very important, but also the language of science is very important, and the playfulness and the storytelling and everything comes together at Baking Lab. It's just a miracle.
We all want to see this miracle happen.
Yes, come and have a look. It's a circular, I don't know what, it's a Harry Potter environment.
Yeah. Where is it? What's the address?
It's in Amsterdam somewhere.
Somewhere in Amsterdam. Okay. For the lucky ones who can find it. Or Google. Okay. Indeed, science. Or Jasmijn Leeuwenkamp. You're a PhD researcher in political philosophy. And you, if you sort of read what it says here, you explore the philosophical implication of rights of nature in your research. And you also said that you really like the abstract and the conceptual of like this conversation as well. Is there any concept that this exercise reminded you of that you can briefly share with us?
I was thinking about, you already mentioned it. You think of it as an object, but it's alive. There's all kinds of organisms in soil That is what makes it alive and what makes other things be able to live on soil, because it's never an individual, it's always a complex symbiosis, as you would call it, as biologists call it, of different organisms, and that's why life happens and works. And I think soil is a very perfect example of where the distinction between objects or animals or organism doesn't really work very well. We used to see it as an object, as land, something to appropriate, but in the end it's still an organism itself. It's part of a system of organisms.
Can you say a little bit more about that little sentence of that's why life works? It's a symbiosis. It's like a combination of what. Can you say a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a biologist.
No, but this like what you meant by that.
Well, we in the sort of Western philosophy framework, we tend to think of different individuals or individuals as part of species that are very successful biologically, the survival of the fittest, and they compete with each other. And we're now seeing that that idea actually does not really fit to what happens biologically, because what actually makes species work is that they work together. And bacteria are a very good example of that. Bacteria can work with other organisms and decompose them, make from waste, make them into food for other organisms. So the food of the one is the waste of the other, and vice versa. And that's how species survive, and not because they're individually so genius or spectacular. So I think soil's a good example of that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Great guest, right? Because mine's mom is like, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did well on that one. Yeah, okay. So let's get into indeed this topic of unseen beings. We're already deep in it, but also a bit more about why we decided to talk about that today with all of us. And indeed, it's about our relationship with unseen beings as well. And when Yuka developed this program, she meant also unseen beings as like non-human beings that are often overlooked by us humans. Because they're just really invisible, we can't see them with our eyes, or maybe we just neglect them, not see them in that way. But they exist everywhere, of course. And Miriam, maybe back to you and the microbes that you work with in the bakery and with all your senses. Can you just give a super small recap about maybe like what are microbes? What do they mean to you personally, and how they play a role? Like, are they the bosses actually of the bakery?
For us, it's just money. No, so
okay.
No, seriously. So I have a background in biology, and I think I'm just always been very curious. I want to learn, and I can learn from many things. And in this part of my life, I try also to learn from this little unseen animals. And obviously, as because we are a bakery, we have a certain goal. So we, I think at our place we really
bake bread.
We bake bread with them, so we did.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a goal, so we want to understand them also in a way that we can manipulate them. Which is different kind of angle than
exploit them.
Yeah, it's true. But we feed them, and we but I think in this deep craving of really understanding what's going on there with the microbes, with how they interact with. So you have bacteria, you have yeast. You were mentioning the right thing, that we tend as humans to see things as a separate thing, but it's more of a. Yeah, it's a kind of orchestra with all where we are interacting together with these little things, and something beautiful comes out of it. And again, we are trying to revive our senses and understand what happens in that process, but at the same time also give a lot of credit to all those scientists that have been studying it in a very traditional Western way of, trying to really take those things apart and see what happens and bring those two worlds together. And I think that's the kind of magic that we play around with, because there are two type of languages that are now often very separated. So if people that are very good in this sensory environment and people that are very good in the scientific world, but they don't interact a lot, and that's what we try to do a little bit. And I think that's a very nice environment to study it, and also to become more respectful of using that knowledge in a process. So it's not just eventually trying to get more and more flavorful food, but it's like really trying to understand what you're doing, and the knowledge that comes out of that is very valuable.
Yeah.
For me as a person, I think also the rest of the team really enjoys this.
Can you maybe share one drop of like insight or knowledge that is interesting for us as non-bakers?
So I personally think a lot of in analogies, and I certainly have a kind of moment where I start to understand something that I sensed or I can relate to, again, scientific literature, and say, oh no, I think I understand it. And I don't know why this one pops up in my mind, but I was, so there is, during fermentation, we have different kind of acidities coming up in the process, and one is
acidities.
Acidities,
so
yeah.
Like how sour it became.
Well,
like
there's different. There's a lot of different acids in the world, and you can make music with it in a way. There's all different tones, but one of them is lactic acid. It's in Dutch it's called melkzuur, and when you have this sourdough environment, which is again a soil of flour and water, and it's beautiful, and you get this right tone out of it, it starts to smell like your mother. The skin of your mother, and then you start to think like, hey, that's interesting.
Everybody's mother?
That I don't know, because I don't know how other
your
mothers,
mother.
My mother, yeah, she's not alive anymore. But I'm serious here. Like you smell the dough in the right environment, so it's starting to become really at its peak soil, we would call it. Like it smells really beautiful. And you say, hey, this is when I was maybe a baby and smelling my mother.
Interesting.
It sounds funny, but it's true. It's suddenly the sourdough reminds you of the skin of your mother. Hey, come on,
wow.
This is my job.
Nice. Thank you.
This is a real thing, and it's. And apparently also this lactic acid, it's a very important part of your skin scent. And like relationships, the thing that we're talking about, we think it's all visual cues, but it's smell between humans that makes us attracted to some other people or not. So there is this all deep layers of connection down there. It's all in the bread.
Nice. As a breastfeeding mother, I'm intrigued.
I know.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Just mine, maybe to move to the concepts again. Because indeed unseen beings in this world are, I was joking about the microbes being exploited, but a lot of unseen beings are being exploited by our human tunnel vision, which is where the rights of nature movement comes in, or the rights of nature type thinking. Can you explain a little bit about what that is for people who has heard of rights of nature before? Kind of like 50-50. Can you explain briefly what it is and also how it's related to human rights, or how the idea of human rights is embedded in it?
Yeah, it's a big question, but I'll try. So rights of nature movement started like around the 70s with the environmental movement and ideas that nature, especially in law, but also in other kinds of normative frameworks, is always an object for human action. So nature is property, or it is land, or it is a cattle in terms of animals. So in the legal system, nature is only property of humans and nothing more. So once a sort of natural environment becomes threatened ecologically, there's nothing lawyers can do. So some lawyers thought we need to give rights to nature itself, and that can have different forms, but a very popular form is to give rights to a natural entity, like a forest or a river or a sea. in the form of legal personhood, and that's already a sort of legal concept that is very commonly used. It's a company is also a legal person. Your baking lab is probably a legal person. So the non-human is already a legal person. So to just extend it to a certain environment or natural entity is not very complicated. But there's also a sort of broader rights of nature movement that is more sort of moralistically informed, that think that nature should be included in a sort of liberal framework of emancipation. So before, women were seen as property of men, and then we have to give rights to women in order also to emancipate them in a sort of moral way, to give them standing in a moral sense. And that's the idea that nature should has its own interests, its own needs, and that we should have more view of that. And I guess there's different kinds of ways rights of nature have been implemented. For example, in Ecuador, it's in part of the constitution. So Mother Nature as a whole is given fundamental rights, very much like human rights. So it has a right to existence, a right to flourish, etc., etc. And that's part of the constitution. But there's also other rights in the constitution, like human rights. So the question is, in this sort of general framing, so this is the other way rights of nature are conceived, apart from the legal person framing. And the question is, how do these different rights balance with each other? So we still have human rights, we also have rights of nature. Does that necessarily mean nature is better protected? That is not yet proved by the rights of nature movement. So it's a very nice idea, but it also has some limitations. But I think we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Later. Yeah.
Before we do, Leon, you're also involved with this, maybe more in an activist way. Is that a right way of putting it? Rights of nature activism, also as part of the Embassy of the North Sea. What do you aim for in that?
Wow, very good question. First of all, to create awareness in a way. About the rights of nature and about the North Sea in this case specifically. It is quite a crux, it's quite a difficult topic of like, okay, how do we represent these kind of bodies? How does it work? Who represents these kind of bodies in a very anthropocentric world and in a legal court in front of humans with other humans and benches and a building? And in a way, we found concepts like guardianship, where we assign people together, or these people assign each other to agree on that we are supporting and understanding and researching and trying to embody the desires of this river. For example, the Whanganui River in New Zealand has legal rights and is a person in a way, and has personhood and has a guardianship. That means that there's many different folks and peoples that represent these kind of river, and a mountain, and Pachamama, and maybe the North Sea in some time. And this is the idea, but then there's still a lot of humans thinking of, okay, how can we represent then the needs of all the living entities in there? So you see it very fastly become very complex. And the question is like, okay, how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we at the embassy, we have a 12-year program ahead of us. I mean, 4 years already in. And we have 3 phases, where the first one is the listening phase, the first 4 years, and then the speaking phase, which we're in now.
When the sea starts to speak.
When we start to understand or to speak for the sea, or we discover different agents that speak for themselves, and we see each other more as a performing actor of an embassy, and we are also trying to be political between the agents. So we're trying to create awareness. We work very interdisciplinary between artists, researchers, scientists as well, of course, and trying to bridge all these different disciplines. And what I was just starting to say is that the first 4 years we just came out of, and I mean, listening is a very active act, to listen. And we saw it also as a very actful act. So the first book that we just published is on like how to be political with water, and this represents somehow the first 4 years, and we have 8 more years to go until 2030.
So listening to speaking to?
The negotiating.
Negotiating, okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And yeah.
Interesting. We're definitely going to hear more about it. Roos, lastly, because I want to ask you about your recent work your work takes many angles, and it's all about relating, but recent angles have been also phenomena, more like death or weather, or that's even beyond like what we're now actually like tangible things that we're talking about. Can you say a little bit more about that, about some of the unseen beings? What are the unseen beings in your recent work and thinking?
Yeah. So I started out my sort of field in design, bio, eco domains, I think about 8 years ago. And then I started working with fungi, right? Working with mycelia and the Schizophyllum communale, which was the species that I worked with. And the intention was to create new biomaterials that were going to save the world. But time was of essence. And somehow I started to meander a bit in my practice, where I do not work with singular organisms anymore, but more maybe with systems or phenomena or weather processes, maybe natural processes, right? Or decay. What I enjoy about working with these systems is that it allows you to have conversations that adhere more to the complexity of life, I feel. Right, so I've been an advocate for a sustainable burial practice called human composteren, the composting of human remains. Right, and this is about soil, it's about religion, it's about tradition, it's about future archaeology, it's about rights of nature. And it allows me to touch upon many different directions, right? And to situate yourself in different places within those systems. So there's a sense, I find it a more, more appealing way into some of the things that are
more
actually
like
really
life,
complex.
like how life works.
It's more like life is super messy, right? You cannot talk about a singular instance, a singular being, right? Nothing exists in a void. So by choosing to work with weather or with decay, right, I cannot not include all the other references that might be of.
How do you make your choices of what to focus on or what phenomena comes to?
No, I mean, I don't know if I make choices.
You're just
right?
part of it. Like
well, I mean, I work very curiosity driven.
Yeah.
You can't include all.
Yeah.
But what I try to do is, for instance, collaborate with many other humans, then at least so that I can maybe include some multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, it's more like a route finding practice, I call it sometimes what I do. So I don't know exactly where I'm going and where the work is going. But the work finds itself and
Yeah. Are there any burning questions already for these people and their work, about their work? Silence, no. Just fascinating. Just fascination. Maybe we can have the mic with you. Yes.
Thank you. I just wonder, did you do any research on decomposing human beings?
Yes. Very brief summary. It's not allowed yet. You have an organization in Washington called Recompose, and they do compost human remains in a sort of casket where they use organic materials to decompose of a human body. And there's an initiative in Germany who's doing something similar. And there's now a foundation called Verarden who's trying to bring that technology, they call it a technology, to the Netherlands. But it's not allowed. What you can do with a human body after it is has passed, is subscribed by law. And at the moment, you can only be buried or cremated. And I think quite soon you can be organically reduced. Loop? From mycelium. Yeah. But it's still buried. And if you bury a body underground, there's less oxygen. So it's a different kind of fermentation process. So having a composting progress is actually a different kind of process. Yeah, and more research, yay. If you have a bundle of money, I have a place. No, I don't have a place, but I know of a place where we can do testing. So for all of you who have access to money, there's probably also other nice
things you can do with
things you can do with it. But you know, if you want to know
them. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Well, yes, partly.
Yeah.
Did you do anything did you do any decomposing yourself?
Yeah. So this is one of the errors that I. No. This is one of the errors I find within myself. So I've been an advocate for this burial practice for the last 3 years, and I think about a year ago I lost touch with it because I realized that I did not have any situated knowledge, right? So I did not put composting into practice. So what I did last year is that I started a worm composter, and I have a bokashi at home, and I did a gardening course. So that's my start, and I would love to start working with animal remains.
No, we're all thinking about the worm again.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, this is a very technical maybe answer, but so I am lacking the knowledge that I need, and I'm trying to learn.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah. I would love to continue.
Yeah.
I would really love to.
I can tell you a lot after the...
Exactly, over drinks. We can have like a special table where we talk about composting and what to do with it.
It will be fun.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Because I would love to use our time to go into the next part of our conversation, which is very much about how can we listen to and represent these unseen voices. You already started that a little bit, this part, but also what are the challenges in that? So, Yechiam, maybe back to you and the microbes in the bakery. How, because you said, we might manipulate them, but we also give them what they need, right? And then we feed them. But how do you try to understand what they need, what they want? How do you maybe communicate with the microbes to understand, like, this is what you want?
It's a difficult question. Again, because we are, well, there is some artistic elements in our company, and we are allowed to, we promote things to go wrong and see what we can learn from them and those kind of things. But again, we still are a company, and we have to bake bread that is good enough that people will come on a daily basis to buy it, etc. So we're in a way still manipulators, but we, I mean, I think that in the same way I try to understand my dog is just by playing with him and doing things that are a bit different, and then suddenly thinking like, okay, what is he at this moment trying to have from me? Well, this is a conscious being. I don't think that yeast and bacteria are in the same way, but maybe on a higher level they are. So, for example, we before in the previous question we addressed the thing of acidity, and acidity is a waste product that appears during fermentation. It happens when the sugars that are available in the environment in the dough are broken down. And so some acidity for us is nice because it's a kind of hint that there is glucose or sugars down there. It's food and gets into our brain and say, hey, this is a good environment to later on bake and eat. But how does that relate to that environment? So the nice thing about, again, baking and the bakery is that when you form this dough, you actually create a kind of mini planet. So the whole discussion we're having here is just, it's a simulation. When you just close this environment of a dough, it gets a membrane, and it starts to multiply inside, so these things start to grow, and there's also death, and there's a whole project of compensation. It's just there. Rose, you just have to go and look inside. All the answers are inside, and then you start to. Then there is these balances, and so there's something nice in our world. I think that when everything is correct in a way, when the bread rises nicely, and the smell of the mother is there. There is something nice that, I mean, poetically you could say like, oh, these guys are happy because they're in their exponential growth, and there is just enough ways to know that something is growing, but it's not polluted enough that things start to die. And we are, I think, sensing and understanding that process, and that's in a way maybe a poetical way to say that we are communicating with that little planet and environment. And it's a very nice metaphor for a lot of things that are happening now in the world when it comes to climate change and all these things, temperature and everything. It's all happening there, and that's our way to talk to them and to learn from them, like, hey guys, what happens when things are going non-linearly? So sometimes the process starts to go very fast, and that's why sometimes fermentation and baking is difficult.
Indeed, it's like it's observing, sensing, playing.
Playing is very important.
And I wonder, Rose, to bring you back in, because your practice is also about like relating, right, and connecting to beings, but then with a focus on touch and relationality and embodiment. Can you maybe give one or two examples of how that we can also maybe practice in how you connect with other beings and maybe communicate?
Let me start off with saying that it's really hard, or I find it really hard, and I think I failed for the remainder of my life maybe to do so. Right, I was working with fungi, and I was treating them as an object, right? Although I had a deep fascination for their role in the ecosystem, and I knew that I was part of that ecosystem, but I did not see it as a relationship. I was tweaking their parameters, right? and allowing them to grow or to differ, but I did not view it as a relationship. And with the humane composting, it's similar, right? I'm advocating for a more sustainable practice, but what was my situated knowledge? So I think for me, it's a constant trying to figure out how I can relate to the topics that I'm advocating for. And for me, the domain of haptonomy, right? Embodied practices help me. So engaging in listening practices where you quiet down and you place your body in various environments. You be quiet, and you just notice what is there to see. And I think for that really changed how I can experience a sense of relationality, I think. But
you
it's
make
hard.
space inside yourself. You quiet down maybe your brain or...
Yeah, for sure the brain. I mean, the brain is great, but not every single time, I think. And especially not if you want to step into a relationship, right? We can have a conversation, or I can just sit with you. And probably if I sit with you, I get to know you better. And I think that same goes for more than human relationships, I think.
Yeah. Leon, you just spoke about 4 years of listening to the sea, the North Sea. Can we learn something from your practice in that? Like how, if you have this big ocean, like how... What have you learned about actually listening effectively then? You said it's very an active act. But
very, very active. I think two things that have been said that are very nicely phrased are poetic ways of seeing things and imagining realities and imagining stories. And I mean, by observing the eel and the whole trajectory of eel, which is an incredible, smart animal that is afraid of being distinct. Yeah, I mean, to tell the story and to create a playful way of interacting with it. I mean, there's a beautiful artwork from Sheng Wenlo who kind of made feel the eel in a way, and it was here in the Marineterrein in Amsterdam, and you could go through a parcours as a human blindfolded or in a very dark environment, and you could feel how it is to work with your senses and to experience what the eel experiences all the time.
Being eel.
And I mean, the term that is anthropomorphizing, where we kind of give human values to these animals, which is a critical term on one hand, but on the other hand, we can also see it playful and try to enrich our own sensitivity and then again empathy and relationalism towards these things. And I think what you said, what was really nicely, and for me to add on, is to stay with the trouble of not knowing, to stay with the engagement, and to either sit down or have a dialogue with things.
Yeah.
I mean, we have looked at windmills and looked at, okay, how does windmills, what does they actually do? And once they are there, they create their own ecosystem by being there for 15 years. So as much as putting them, it would be such a big impact as taking them away again, because they are an ecosystem and they are completely entangled, and we rather see them as then, you know, trash, or we want to get rid of them again and make one that is more efficient. And how do we interlink in that process of relating to these non-human actors?
Yeah, nice. So it's also very much about human creativity in that sense, and lateral thinking, like how can we see things differently. Let's look at it a little bit more critical now. Not that we've not been critical so far, but just like some of the challenges with this, and especially this rights of nature type thinking, which is an attempt of us to listen to nature, right? Like we think like if we give the river rights, or if we give the forest rights, or if we give nature that we conceptualize rights, then we're listening to them and giving them a voice. But what are like major challenges that you see with this approach, this rights of nature approach?
Yeah, I think in general it is also to be seen. It's a very new development, but I think one big challenge is that if you say the term nature already suggests that you give rights to a certain fragmented entity that can be enclosed from its larger environment. And I think, for example, in the North Sea, it's very difficult to draw a line. Here's what the sea ends and begins, and this belongs to it, and this doesn't belong to it. Because the sea is also interacting with the larger atmosphere of which it's part, and especially eels go outside of the sea at some point. So there's this risk of fragmentation, I think, which is not necessarily a big problem. I mean, you can have a sort of working definition and then just work with it. But there is, in some strands of sort of rights of nature thinking, there is this sort of risk of essentializing nature and also seeing it apart from humans. So if we talk about a river or a forest, it's something external, and it doesn't really emphasize the sort of relationality of the human with the environment. So it, for example, what you were saying about what is our own effect on this in terms of waste, in terms of maybe tourism, in terms of a sea, and that can be a bit maybe sort of not really in front of the picture when we're talking about a sea externally in itself.
Yeah.
And there's also, of course, in general, if you talk about rights is a very particular way of making something easier to use in the law, but it also creates you inscribe a certain subject position onto something, which also is very difficult to sort of align with this.
What do you mean by that, a subject position?
In the terms of that it has to have subjective interests.
What do you mean by that?
So if you give rights to something, you assume that there's an entity that is the subject of the rights, right?
Yeah.
But what is the subject of rights of nature? In this sense, let's take the example of the sea. It is very difficult to see that as a subject. It does some harm to what a sea actually is to make it into a legal subject. So there is some law always abstracts.
But what is the harm done in this example? Like we make the sea into a subject and then?
Yeah. Well, actually, seas don't function as excluded subjects, like law would think of it, which is easy to give rights to something and also duties. Legal persons can have property. In fact, I think the North Sea owns itself. And there you see, I saw that somewhere on a website, but I don't know if you still have that phrasing, but I think it's interesting that you have this liberal self-ownership idea for a sea. Like, why does the sea have to own itself? Like, why is there ownership involved in general? It's a very sort of human way of looking at something that, nature doesn't work like that, of course. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just, it has some certain sort of limitations.
So with our human eyes, we look at the thing and we kind of project what we think a human would want, and then the ocean would want.
Yeah, and when you make something into a subject, you have to define what fits into that subject. So human rights have a very clear definition, and of course that definition has not been inclusive historically for a very long time. But you have the duty to have a certain sort of, it is essentializing in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still trying to really grasp, like, okay, so we do that, we project, like we pretend the ocean, the sea is a human, and it's clearly not, and we're trying to, maybe like we're not answering the needs that the ocean has by pretending it's a human. Is that what, like, I'm trying to get more tangible on the harm, like what is the...
Yeah, maybe it's not necessarily a harm. It's well, you already said it, like it's also anthropomorphic to, that means that you sort of project human-like characteristics onto the non-human, so to say. And the problem is it can become a paternalistic relation that we will know what is the best interest of the sea. And I think especially with animals, the knowing more and relating more with the animal can also result in a very oppressive relationship where we know best how to get as much milk from the cow because we understand how it works. So it's more knowledge and more relation doesn't necessarily mean it's better for the non-human.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm starting to get it. Yeah. Also, last month I was in this conversation with someone called Asa Raskin, who's using AI to start understanding what more than human species are saying. Like, for instance, whales, you know, like they have language and they communicate with each other. And he showed this graph of, like, if you see time and space on Earth, then humans have like a fraction of like what we can perceive, right, of time and space. Like, we just have a little part, and a lot of other species have a lot. Like, we can't see and perceive everything. We think we know what other species want, or what they experience, or what the ocean wants, or etc. But we actually only see and experience and perceive a small part. So maybe that relates to what you're saying, that we miss a big part of what is actually happening on Earth, that other species might have more awareness of, and also maybe know better, or like all combined knowledge, know what we need collectively.
Yeah, I think in general representation is very complicated. How do you really know what the interests are of the thing or the person entity you are representing? That also happens on a human level. Do you really know what children need or want? Do you really know? And also with animals, and especially I think with the sea, and that's why it's also very good that you're doing this research, because that's very complicated. A lot of people will probably think, how can you know what the sea wants or needs? But in that sense, I think you also need to see it more poetically, and it needs to be more about exactly our relationship to the sea. So it's not about a sea separately that has certain universal interests. It's about what can we perceive as our responsibility to what is happening with the sea from what we know, I guess.
Because what would that mean for our approach, indeed, if we make it about our relationship to the sea, for instance? What would that change in what we do, or what Leon does, for instance?
You're still asking me?
No, not necessarily.
Interesting question. I mean, this is a very valid topic, and I think that a term that has to be mentioned here is reductionist approach that science really focuses on, and that means to take things apart and try to look at them as the smallest thing, which is a very, I mean, you could say it's a very common mistake in science to do so, because you disentangle everything that is actually related to each other, and you try to find a solution for this specific case, and we tend to do that. And if we think of like the sea as, okay, we're gonna do the best for the sea, and then isolate it from whatever is there, this is where then this approach really fails or shows failure in a way.
Yeah. Let's go into this kind of one before last big question we have about, which is totally in line with this, like this dichotomy between human and non-human, right? Because that's what we're talking about now as well, in a way. Like this is human and that's nature, and that causes quite a lot of issues, actually, in how we act towards that other. So a question to any of you that feels called to answer, like how might we see it differently? How can we redefine this dichotomous thinking, human versus non-human? How else could we experience or think about it?
If I may, I think there's two very influential people that I have been very influenced by, which is Andreas Weber, who has written the book Indigenealität, and it's really about
proof of German.
Proof of German. Do you want the English translation of it? Or
yes.
Indigenealität. So what the geniality that is within indigena people, but also he mentions also the risk that comes with it, and with not trying to exploit their idea of whatever they are doing to Pachamama and try to apply their rules to us and exploit in that case, but rather think about that's what we did as the embassy. We went to fishermen in Friesland and had looked at them for like what they have been doing over the last 6 generations and their myths and their relations to fish and to the sea and these kind of storytellings. But this is not where I want to get to. Rather, I want to rephrase him as he says that whatever we become or whatever we eat, we become. Whatever we inhale, we are. And that was very liberating to think of, okay, this what Ykül says is Umwelt, the thing that are surrounding us. We are whatever surrounds us. And we become whatever surrounds us, since we are in constant oxygen, carbon dioxide exchange, since we eat and we digest it, and every molecule in our body, the bread, everything, the sourdough in our gut, everything becomes us in a way and helps us and fosters us, but also harms us. And I mean, if we look at illness rates or whatsoever, whatever is there happening in our body that is not so easy to understand. And yeah, these are the two things.
Yeah,
that I think
nice.
really
You want to add something, Roos?
Well, yeah, just maybe as an add-on, I think that somehow we seem to complexify something that's really, really simple. We are a body, right? We metabolize, we grow, we decay, we need things from our surroundings for our livelihood, and we also leave things from our livelihoods, just as many other species. So there's a lot of similarities, and I think it's just really simple, actually, instead of very complex. And I'm also sometimes therefore quite surprised that we need something as a law to understand when we do harm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just.
And do we have any thoughts about if we kind of master this awareness of like, oh wait, we're not just separate, right? As humans, we are indeed our surroundings. We are what we eat. We are what we inhale. We're made up of a microbiome. We're like a billion creatures in one, right? Or billions, probably. You want to say something?
Well, yeah, the image that comes into my mind is that I think that life is more of a unique place in natural science, where energy somehow comes in and can be transformed into something else, and that's basically what makes every living entity different from the innate environment. And we humans have a bit more of skills to turn that energy into different kind of colors, but eventually we're just, it's just a big picture where there's a lot of dots of colors, and the problem with humanity is that we think that we are something unique, but we are just a dot of paint that is changing its colors all the time, and it flows into one big picture, and it's all about balances that are shifting. So if you're changing the sea, then the sea will change something else, and that will change something else, and that painting is evolving all the time. And that's the nice thing about, I think, evolution and biology is that it's just a stream of change and transformation all the time, and we think that we are in control of it, but it's we're just paint.
We're just paints, flowing paints, different colors. Yeah, thank you. And lastly, before I invite one or two more questions from you, I would love to explore, because we're here designing cities for all, right? It's also about like designing and moving forward with what we understand. So I'm curious, like with this awareness of what we just spoke about, both the knowing that we need to do better at communicating, listening to the unseen beings, and we can move away from this underlying problem that we feel so separate from them. We're actually not separate. Having more of that awareness, what are some of the design practices or insights, like applicable insights from your experiences that can help us move away from how we've been doing things?
On that dress, this is confusing.
As in, move away from the dichotomous mindset, or move away from the not hearing or seeing or communicating with others.
It's a matter of languages. I mean, the moment you start to think or ask those questions, your language becomes richer, and that's where we are oral beings that I think eventually seek for new words or new tones or whatever, and this is an opportunity to turn awareness into beautiful speech or something like that.
Okay.
So I think.
Do you have any word that comes to mind that we can start using instead of an old word that doesn't work?
Many, but can you give me a kind of a
like a little help? I mean it more like, indeed, if we don't want to be human-centric, right, in how we design things, what other like ways of, or what other language can we use if we don't want to say human-centric design, for instance? Like what other word can we use?
Just give me a minute to think about it.
Sure, for sure. It'll take like 5.
I mean, there's an alternative of planic-centric, planic-centric terminology, but then, I mean, there's a big problem where us designing now for the planet?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you design for the planet?
It's not so actionable, maybe.
I think again, this connection that we were talking in the beginning, and we're sharing some information, and then very quickly figuring out that we are all in some way connected by our interests, by the people that we suddenly know, and that those kind of interactions are always there, but the design of our language, our culture, in many ways, does not always promote the investigation of this kind of relationships, that everything is almost somewhere connected. You have this concept of 7 degrees of separations. I mean, we're all basically one kind of illusion or
separation illusion.
And if you would make a design where you somehow promote that you easily interact with the person next to you somehow in a playful manner, and also with the unseen environment, then you might eventually end up with new words, new language. And you remember in the beginning that we were talking about the concept of we using words that in other kind of cultures they just even don't know why you were thinking about this kind of thing, because that's natural for them. So we should design a new kind of language.
Okay, let's bring this down.
And natural design language. That's what we need. We need a new kind of language, really.
But then, okay, let's really bring this down all the way for a second. Fish and tomatoes reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen, actually. So fish, because I think it clarifies something. The fish doorbell in Utrecht. Can you say something about that?
It's a really cool experiment or practice. It's so there's a kennel in Utrecht. I do not know exactly which kennel, but it's like a sluice. It's closed. They close it off. They close the water off, and there's a lot of fish for whom the migration route of this kennel is very important to finish their migrations. So a lot of fish are waiting in front of the door of the what's sluice in English?
What is sluice? Sluice?
Sluice.
Lock?
And an S.
Okay, the thing that
Sluice, like the
separates
closes,
water.
yeah. Thing that closes inside the water.
So what they thought of is that they build a camera underwater that sees that films the fish, and then everybody online around the whole world can go to this website of the fish doorbell, and they can see which fish and how many are waiting, and they can press the doorbell. And there's some guy, and he is living close to the sluice.
Sluice. Yeah.
and if he gets a lot of rings, then he goes to the sluice and he opens it, and then the fish can swim on. And so this is a way to the guy now doesn't have to sit there all day and look himself to the fish, but actually everybody around the world is looking at the fish, and they have made pictures. They're on the website. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And it's a very simple, practical thing. And I think it's really cool because you become aware of the non-humans in your environment, and you think about how our infrastructure is also affecting them.
It's also really empathy with the fish in their situation.
Like we just have with the worm. Like you think, all these poor fish who are waiting.
Yeah, they're just waiting. There are better things to do. Yeah, nice. Tomato.
Very nice. Can you share this link to the
Fishdoorbell.nl.
Fish doorbell. Okay,
Fishdoorbell.nl. Great.
But it's now out of. It's not working right now. It opens in March again.
So there's a queue of fish.
There's a huge queue of fish. I have no idea. We can check.
In March, the new fish come back and they need the doorbell. Yeah.
I designed a performance that is meant to how to become a tomato, and this invites the audience and everybody that's participating to become a tomato plant. And it came out of the necessity of not eating animal products, and then learning about plant neurobiology and thinking of like, okay, plants understand, they learn, they live, they are intelligent. They're empathic with each other. They share. How am I able to feed myself anymore with these knowledge? And then I was like, I learned from Andreas Weber that whatever we eat, we become. And with this, there becomes a responsibility of interacting and acting for whatever we eat. And with that said, I developed kind of a computational performance where you follow a rule set.
Computational performance?
It's kind of structured improvisation. So you have certain points where you very basic rules where you just follow.
Can we do a little bit like in 2 minutes?
We can't do a little bit in 2 minutes because it takes some time to get into it. Because it's kind of a long-term movement practice that you do. And through this basic rule set, you kind of alienate or disfamiliarize yourself, and you start to move in a certain way and as slow as possible. That's one of the biggest things, that you move as slow as you can. And actually, you just move up to your highest point and then down again and up and down. And you do this we as performers do this then for 45 minutes, or I did it to practice and to understand what I'm actually doing for multiple hours. And with a light on top, so you also feel the heat of the lamp on top of you, and you kind of sense the light within yourself and on your skin, and with that you really start moving up and down, and it is a very meditative practice that allows yourself to kind of associate yourself with, okay, what is it to be a tomato plant.
So what do you then learn from that in your design practice?
The participation makes you understand and makes you familiarize and defamiliarize at the same time of like the similarities that we have with tomato plants, and also the connection that we can have with a tomato plant if we want to. And of course, this is translated through.
But like, if a tomato farmer in the Westland would do this with you, what might he change in the design of his greenhouse with the tomatoes?
Very good question. He would hopefully give them soil instead of growing them in styrofoam.
Yeah.
And he would probably have them connected to each other and let them alimentate each other, because he understands that that's very important, and that he also likes to be connected to his neighbors instead of being isolated in a little cell. And that moving up and down very slowly is very tiring. And that there is energy, and that you need support, and that you need alimentation, and that you need care. Instead of pumping chemistry into oneself and let them grow as efficient as possible.
Nice. Rose, any last design principle that you might want to add from your own work?
Principles may be a bit strong. But are there any designers here, I assume? Oh, so few.
Few, yeah.
That's interesting.
There was one watching online who was wondering where the design elements would come in.
Yeah. So no, maybe I would just invite those who are designers to really start working in a participatory manner, to go beyond your own practice and try to work with those who are affected by your design, right? Whether that's another human or whether that's a plant, and start doing that as early as possible. I'm testing it out at the moment, and it's actually quite fun to do really your design or your research, I must say, also in a participatory way, because you have no idea where you're going to go, and you start working as a sort of flock of co-researchers.
Like we just did with the soil.
Like we just did with the soil, yeah. I mean, if we would extend on that, we would have, right, conversations with each other, and then maybe see what would be a next step that we could take following what we just learned.
Yeah, nice.
So that would be an invitation to those few designers who are here and the one in the audience.
Yeah, thank you. We have space for one or maybe two short questions. There was one ready, boiling, ripe question here.
Especially interested in the philosophical, political part that you mentioned. We can't even agree on Palestine being a state. So who would have jurisdiction over these entities, also as a multinational? Because on another side, they fulfill quite a lot of requirements for being a state, for what we understand as a state. So there's borders, there's a lot of things we could account it for, but would it need another, maybe, international entity, or being an observer in the UN, for example, as some states with real people, in that sense, have at the moment, while they're not having the same rights as the Netherlands. So
you're talking in relation to the non-human, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would your jurisdiction internationally look for?
Yeah, so there are different strategies. They're trying to get the rights of nature in the Universal Declaration, in a sort of universal declaration form for Mother Nature. I do not know why it has to be mother, but there's gender aspect there. But I think there's always it can be very helpful. There's also the strategy to have ecocide as a sort of legal. So ecocide means that there's it's going to be legally arranged that if you are a large polluter, or there's certain harm towards the environment that's very destructive, then you can be criminalized and penalized. And I think that is a very different strategy from rights of nature, because it's more on the responsibility side, I would say. It is not about nature itself or what it needs or interests, but it's more about what are we doing right now that's really harmful. And I think then you move it again to the human responsibility, which I think is very important, because the political aspect, even though, the practical embedded is very promising, there's also this really ethical political aspect, and that's where law, I think, is important, because the way we have structured different states, different territories, also nation states are very much connected to the idea of land, and that land is always also soil and natural land, and you see it also in the laws of the sea. The sea is also divided in different jurisdictions. We have different animal law. We have parts of private law that are about property. So you see in the way we legally have arranged or organized this, that it's also limiting us in what we can, how we can do something about it. And I think these new strategies are helpful, but there's always the problem of this universalizing aspect, that that there's this political element. Who decides? Because the climate change is a very politicized event. There's certain countries that really contributed a lot, and certain countries that are very vulnerable, who barely contributed anything to the problem. So if the same states that always have had power have power again, that's maybe not the best strategy.
Can we have the mic? And can we try to keep it super brief?
Yeah. So in Germany, the state was convicted of not following the conventions now for the temperature limit. And the problem is, yes, they're convicted, but there's no jurisdiction, so the state can't get punished. So who would be the ones who punishes in the right or in the name of nature?
Yeah, so that's how you in the Netherlands had the Urgenda case, where the state was successfully sued for not meeting the climate goals. And they will have to, in some way, now abide to the percentages. So, I mean, it's very, very limiting what is being done with these cases, because there needs to be done way more. But it is, in terms, it's hopeful that law can do something in this respect, when, especially with changing governments.
Another table at the drink to explore this.
Super political.
No. It's important because that makes it real, right? Yeah, definitely. I think we're tired, sensing the energy. Are we okay rounding off? Nobody gonna be sad for not asking their question? We're good? Everyone? Doesn't back? Okay, because then let's take a few minutes to wrap this up together, because we discussed a lot of things in this hour and a half, and a lot of things that are connected, but also just to recap it briefly, like why were we talking about this all? Because it's pretty magical stuff, first of all. Indeed, the sourdough bread that smells like your mother. That gives a whole new dimension to it. But also because we're destroying a lot of the unseen, or at least not creating the conditions that they need, or that we think they need, projecting on them. We also spoke about how then to connect to the unseen beings. Like, what are some of the ways that we here use, like simply observing, using your different senses, playing around, experimenting, and seeing what happens, making space in your own self, becoming quiet so that you can listen, becoming poetic sometimes, or using your imagination, and sometimes indeed anthropomorphizing. Almost good. Anthropomorphizing helps for us to feel. And we spoke about also then, okay, wait a minute, we have this whole, we think we need to connect to the other beings, but are we actually other than them, or are we part of one and the same thing? Is it really that dichotomous or not? Because indeed, what we eat is what we become, what we inhale is what we become, what we are is, is so multiple and so connected, and so just we're bodies that are like all other bodies, part of everything else that we live in. We also then finally landed on the design aspect, which was about language that we use, or that we choose to use, or that we invent for this. It was also about empathy, like with the soil and the worm, we already felt it, like, wait, it becomes alive, it becomes seen to us. It was about embodiments, or creating the conditions of being a tomato so that you can design better for the tomato, and about participatory, like involving others in your work as well, so that we don't end up projecting or oppressing those beings that we're trying to listen to, but rather really move away from the self-centeredness, or thinking we know it all. Maybe we can feel more than know sometimes. Yeah. So thank you so much for being part of this evening. I hope it was. How was it for you? Great. Interesting movie. Was it a good movie? Was it a good movie?
Lovely actors, right?
Yeah. Great acting. Thank you for everyone here in the room for being with us. Thank you also for watching from home. This concludes this Designing Cities for All special, Seeing the Unseen. And we're not done, of course, with the series. There's going to be on Monday the 29th of January, we're going to be back with a 3-part series called Beings of the Economy with Shinta Oosterwel, the new DCFA fellow. And there we will explore this idea of the economy as a sanctuary for all life. So that's very much maybe building on some of the foundations that we explored here. You're very welcome to join us there. You're also welcome to become a friend of Pakhuis de Zwijger, so that we can always keep these conversations accessible for everyone, and you can think along about the programming. If you want that, you can scan the QR code. And for now, thank you so much for being here, and see you soon. Have a great evening.